When the cops got to the house, they saw that the front door was open. As they got closer, they saw what they thought was someone lying on the floor. They shouted at them, but they didn't respond. Then there was a gunshot. Every parent wants to raise their kids in their own way, but in the case of the Stockdales in Beach City, Ohio, the house rules might have made it more likely that innocent people would get killed. The strangest thing? So, about the Stockdale family massacre. We don't know why it happened. The perpetrator hasn't explained yet, and the police haven't said much about it either. But we'll try to look at the horrible details of the Stockdale family massacre today. It shows that even seemingly happy families can have a lot of hidden problems and that these can build up and suddenly lead to violence. The Stockdale family were very religious and decided to move away. Tim and Kathy Stockdale wanted their kids to have good Christian values, and they thought the best way to do this was to keep them away from the real world. The family moved to a farm in Beach City, Ohio, where they raised their 4 sons, Calvin, Charles, Jacob, and James. Kathy was a very strict mother. She made a series of rules that the boys had to follow. Otherwise, they'd be punished or rewarded with small prizes like the chance to listen to "We moved out to the farm to raise our kids to be good people." On the day we moved in, we heard gunshots in the neighborhood, and I knew we'd made the right call. But the family still had plenty of fun. Kathy and Tim loved bluegrass music, and their kids showed a lot of musical promise. Jacob especially was a fiddle-playing prodigy. He learned to play the instrument at the age of 7 and had mastered it before he hit puberty. Because of his talent, Jacob won awards. He even became the Ohio State Grand Fiddle Champion in 2012, a few years after an event that probably set the stage for the murders that would follow. The Stockdales eventually formed a family band, with Calvin on the banjo, Charles on the mandolin, and James on the... He became Ohio State Grand Fiddle Champion in 2012, a few years after an event that probably set the stage for the murders that would happen. The Stockdales eventually formed a family band, with Calvin on the banjo, Charles on the mandolin, James on the upright bass, and Jacob on the fiddle, of course. Their father, Tim, was the band's frontman on guitar and main singer. However, all of the sons sang from time to time. Music. Applause. Music. Applause. Music. The boys didn't have much to enjoy apart from the family band was the only entertainment the boys had. Their parents didn't let them watch TV, play video games, listen to most types of music, or even make friends with anyone outside the family. Kathy saw dating as a physical danger to her children, since she was worried that they might get someone pregnant, and prohibited them from talking to any girls. This meant that the supposedly wholesome family was effectively a prison for all 4 of the children. But in the early 2000s, a TV show called Wife Swap was all the rage. In the show, 2 families would swap wives or mothers. For a few weeks, the families were usually very different from each other. This was to highlight the diversity of family life in America and to use the tension and conflict that would inevitably occur for comedic and dramatic effect. In 2008, the Stockdale boys begged their parents to take part in the show. Kathy and Tim made the fateful decision to agree. Little did Kathy know that she had just started a sequence of events that would culminate in her brutal murder. When the producers of Wife Swap saw the Stockdale way of life, they knew they had solid TV material. They had got in touch with the Tonkovich family in Illinois, who were basically the polar opposites of the Stockdales. Lori Tonkovich didn't impose any rules on her children. They would wake up whenever they wanted, wear whatever they wanted, and eat a diet consisting mostly of fast food. Needless to say, when Lori swapped places with Kathy, she was shocked by just how strict the mother of the household could be, especially when she read about the routine the boys had to follow after being woken up at 7. The boys had just 4 minutes to get to the breakfast table, otherwise they'd be in trouble. They'd then have to do all kinds of jobs on the farm and around the house, and they'd have to do them really quickly. The boys had exactly 4 minutes to get to the breakfast table, otherwise they'd be fined 25 cents. They'd then do all sorts of chores on the farm and in the house. If they did their chores with a glad heart, which means they didn't complain about how hard they were forced to work, they'd get tokens that they could exchange for little pleasures, like listening to a family-friendly radio show under strict supervision. You get to listen to the radio. Yeah, who picks those? Oh, this is great. This is 100 tokens, right? Yeah, and that's okay with you? I would rather not have to do the tokens to get like a radio show. After finishing their chores, the boys gathered together. With homeschooling, they couldn't even get out of the house to study, so basically they had no contact with other kids their age. Kathy probably taught them a Christian-focused syllabus, so there was less focus on science and facts and more on biblical stories. During the show, Lori got so upset when she saw how the boys were living that she burst into tears. God, I feel so sad for these kids. I'm going to take them all home with me. I asked him what he would like to do. If he could do anything, he wouldn't even know, would he? They need to know there are other ways of doing things and then let them decide what they want to do. I didn't realize this was going to be so hard. She wanted to have a positive impact on the kids' lives, so she decided to introduce them to some of the things they'd missed out on. This meant setting up a cable TV connection and buying a video game console. The boys seemed excited about the games, but Jacob notably said he didn't. So, James was talking about how guilty he felt but that he still loved playing video games. This also showed just how deep the Stockdale family's indoctrination went. When Lori encouraged Jacob to watch some TV, he reportedly broke down crying and ran outside. Lori then followed him and asked him what was wrong, and the answer she got was as shocking as it was heartbreaking. Jacob said that he was worried about going to hell if he watched TV, even though, I'm not so sure about this, James. I mean, on the one hand, he did talk about how guilty he felt, but on the other, he still loves playing video games. This also showed just how deep the family's indoctrination went when Lori encouraged Jacob to watch some TV. He broke down in tears and ran outside, and Lori followed him and asked what was wrong. The answer she got was as shocking as it was heartbreaking. Jacob said he was worried about going to hell for watching TV, even though Lori was most likely showing him wholesome, family-oriented content. She tried her best to change how the Stockdales lived, but there was no chance they'd listen. They were far too set in their ways, and the fact that Tim was there to reinforce Kathy's rules didn't help matters much. As the episode drew to a close, Kathy and Lori had very different takes on what the experience had taught them. You can do things just for fun, and not everything has to be written out and structured. So it wasn't all that bad, was it? I mean, I have a better idea now of what I don't want my family to be like. I can't think of anything here at this family that I would want to bring back. One thing that's clear is that Kathy had a very rigid personality. If she thought something was right, no one could convince her to change her mind. Even though Lori had been immersed in an environment that was so alien to her, Kathy seemed unable to even imagine a life that wasn't as regimented or controlled as the one she made her kids live. Tim's unwavering support meant that she had no one to criticize her, and there's a good chance that many, if not most, of the rules came from the family patriarch himself. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. The Stockdale's experience with a wife swap in 2008 didn't seem to change anything, at least on the surface. Years went by and the boys finally started, so Calvin left home and moved out to go to college. He went to Hillsdale College in Michigan, which was miles away from his parents, and started working as a teacher at the institute. His younger brother Charles went to Philadelphia to study medicine at Adelphia. It's worth mentioning that the boys didn't choose to go to college in Ohio. They traveled thousands of miles away, which made it look like they were running from something or someone. So, by 2017, only 26-year-old Jacob and 21-year-old Jacob and James, who were both in their mid-20s, were still living with their parents. It's pretty intriguing that they didn't leave, as it adds more mystery to the events that followed. Why didn't Jacob, the man in his mid-20s, just move out of the family home? There's an explanation for James deciding to stay. He was studying business at a nearby university and had dreams of managing the family band one day. But as for Jacob, one has to wonder why he didn't just start a life of his own. The Stockdale family band kept going, albeit without the involvement of Calvin. Charles and Jacob formed a trio and started performing at events all over the state. They built up a decent following and even recorded a few albums' music. But apart from that, there was simply no reason for Jacob to stay in the tiny town of Beechview. It's possible that this was the whole problem. Jacob had nowhere to go. He might not even have known who he was. Even though he might have seemed perfectly all right on the outside, inside, a sense of turmoil had started to build, and it would soon erupt in a bloody explosion of violence at around 4. On June 15, 2017, Stark County Police got a 911 call that ended with the caller hanging up. They went to the Stockdale residence, where the call had come from, to investigate. When they arrived, they heard a loud bang and rushed into the home. There they saw Jacob with a shotgun wound to his head. He was still alive, but barely, and the presence of the firearm next to him meant that the wound was almost certainly self-inflicted. The police went upstairs to continue their search and found Kathy and James dead on the floor. Their bodies had been badly hurt by lots of shots from a shotgun. Tim was outside the house at the time, but he was devastated when he found out what had happened. Jacob had killed his mother and brother and then tried to kill himself. The police went upstairs to continue their search and found Kathy and James dead on the floor. They'd been shot. Tim was outside the house at the time, but he was devastated when he found out why. Jacob had killed his mother and brother and then tried to take his own life. However, his self-inflicted gunshot wound meant that he needed urgent medical attention. He was taken to a local hospital, where doctors treated his wounds while everyone tried to understand why he would have done such a thing. It's hard to know what the motive may have been. There's some speculation, but I don't really want to get into that part of it. We'll continue to investigate this case and try to determine if there's a motive. I don't know when Calvin found out about his mom and little brother getting murdered. He released a statement saying that James, our youngest brother, has always been the life and soul of the family. Aside from being a talented musician, James loved dancing and had a natural talent for working with people. James was working on a business degree and wanted to go into the business side of entertainment. He leaves behind many friends and a family that love him dearly. Tim also released a statement that read, "Kathy has, We don't know when Calvin found out about his mom and little brother getting murdered. He released a statement saying that James, our youngest brother, has always been the life and soul of our family. Aside from being a gifted musician, James loved dancing and had an innate love of people. James was working on a business degree and hoped to go into the business side of entertainment. He leaves behind many friends and a family that love him dearly. Tim also released a statement that read, "Kathy has been my beloved wife of 32 years and a wonderful mother to our 4 sons. She loved nothing more than being a mother and grandmother. She had a strong love of learning and was passionate about her Christian faith, natural health, and organic farming." In both statements, it seemed like Tim and Calvin were intentionally avoiding mentioning their brother. In fact, the only cursory acknowledgement of what Jacob had done came from an earlier statement from Calvin in which he thanked the medical team. "She was my wife for 32 years and a wonderful mother to our 4 sons. She loved being a mother and grandmother. She was interested in learning and was passionate about her Christian faith, natural health, and organic farming." In both statements, it seemed like Tim and Calvin were intentionally avoiding mentioning their brother. The only casual mention of what Jacob had done came from an earlier statement from Calvin in which he thanked the medical center that treated him, though he didn't mention him specifically. Jacob was seriously wounded after his suicide attempt. He lost sight in his left eye and suffered serious brain damage, which made it unclear whether he'd be fit to stand trial. The police decided not to charge him until he had fully recovered from his injuries, which led to over a year of uncertainty about what would happen next. On September 26, 2018, Stark County Police finally charged Jacob with 2 counts of first-degree murder, and his bail was set at $1 million. On October 9th, Jacob's defense attorney filed a motion to determine his competency to stand trial. Jacob pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity and was sent to Heartland Behavioral Health Hospital for observation. Jacob spent over a year at Heartland, where doctors constantly tried to test his mental competency. They held mock trials where they used legal jargon and tried to work out if Jacob understood how the court system worked. The culprit also made 2 escape attempts during his time at the Mental Health Institute. The first was in November 2019, when he tried to hide behind a stack of books until he was caught 2 months later. Jacob tried blending in with a crowd of people leaving the institute, but he was caught once again. This showed that he had enough mental competence to stand trial, but it would take more than this to convince the court. His sanity hearings were postponed multiple times due to the pandemic, and it wasn't until September of 2020 that he appeared in court via video link. For some reason, Jacob refused to respond when the judge addressed him, but he didn't respond. It's possible that he was afraid of technology because he'd never used a computer before, or maybe he was truly disoriented by what was happening. His silence could have been a ruse to strengthen his insanity plea, but either way, his refusal to respond in court didn't work in his favor. "Are you able to hear me? Officer, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, I can. Thank you, Mr. Stockdale. I am Judge Frank Foran. Do you hear me? Today? Okay. He's not responding. I first wanted to check if they could hear, and the officer standing behind him didn't hear. He was deemed fit to stand trial by a psychologist on December 31st, 2020. The trial date was constantly pushed back due to, "Yes, I hear you. Yes, I hear you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Stockdale. I am Judge Frank Foran. Do you hear me? Today? Okay." He's not responding. At first, I was wondering if they could hear, and the officer standing behind him didn't hear. He was eventually deemed fit to stand trial by a psychologist on December 31st, 2020. The trial date was constantly pushed back due to the pandemic, and behind the scenes, the Stockdale family took the opportunity to plead on Jacob's behalf. Even though he killed Kathy and James, the Stocks begged the judge to give him a lenient sentence if he was convicted. It's possible that the judge agreed, as long as Jacob pleaded guilty. Or perhaps there was a shift in Jacob's own mindset. Whatever the case may be, back in 2021, on April 28th, almost 4 years after he'd killed his family in cold blood, Jacob Stockdale pleaded guilty to both murders. The judge seemed to have agreed to the Stockdales' request for leniency, sentencing him to a surprisingly short 15 years for each murder. Jacob will be eligible for parole in 2048, and it looks like his family might be willing to bring him home. On March 28, 2021, almost 4 years after he killed his family in cold blood, Jacob admitted to both murders. The judge seemed to have agreed to the Stockdales' request for leniency, since he sentenced him to a surprisingly short 15 years for each offense. Jacob will be eligible for parole in 2048, and from the looks of things, his family might be willing to bring him back into the fold. They've clearly forgiven him for all he's done, likely due to their commitment to Christian values. The only piece of the puzzle that's still missing is the motive, and there are several theories that might explain why Jacob killed his family members that day. Some psychologists have theorized that Kathy had a severe form of obsessive-compulsive disorder. The way she planned the kids' routines and the food she fed them might be another clue to the diagnosis. You see, Kathy never let her kids eat anything she didn't make. Even if they went out, they'd never go to a restaurant. Instead, Kathy would prepare a huge meal that they'd take with them. The Stocks were also very big on the idea of organic foods and natural living. Jacob might have had some kind of mental illness, maybe even OCD, passed down from his mom, and spending his life in isolation made it way worse than it would have been otherwise. Kathy was dead set on the idea that leisure and fun of any kind were sinful, and life was all about work. Nothing was more morally righteous than keeping yourself busy all day, which meant that Jacob had no chance to develop his own personality. He was totally dependent on his mother to arrange his routine and tell him how to live his life. When it comes to his desire to commit murder, there are two possibilities. The first is that Jacob simply lost it and wanted to take revenge for the perceived abuse he'd experienced at the hands of his mother. The second is, he might have just been trying to escape, and since he didn't want James to go through what he had experienced, he killed him too. There's no way of knowing what was going through Jacob's mind before he killed Kathy. He seemed like just another normal guy in his mid-20s until he became a cold-blooded killer. So, it seems like Jacob just wanted to escape. He didn't want James to go through what he had experienced, so he killed him too. I guess there's no way of knowing what was going through Jacob's mind before he killed James. He seemed like just another normal guy in his mid-20s until he became a cold-blooded killer. The last upload on Kathy Stockdale's official YouTube channel is a song recorded by Jacob and James to celebrate James's 21st birthday. It's a song about the fear of growing up, and in it, James asks if there's another option. The brothers then sing a beautiful rendition of the song Tall Buildings, which they uploaded exactly 3 months before one of them killed the other. Jacob doesn't look like a murderer in the video, if any. This song was recorded by Jacob and James to celebrate James's 21st birthday. It's about the fear of growing up, and in it, James asks if there's another option. The brothers then sing a beautiful version of the song Tall Buildings, which they uploaded exactly 3 months before one of them killed the other. Jacob doesn't look like a murderer in the video, if any. It shows just how much love the brothers had. A love that might have been the feeling that drove Jacob to pull the trigger. Thank you everyone for all the birthday well wishes last week. I had a great day full of friends and good music. Doesn't get much better than that, does it? At 21 years old, I think I'd be ready to grow up and join adulthood. Is there a third option? This just shows how much the brothers loved each other. Maybe it was this love that made Jacob want to pull the trigger. Thanks everyone for the birthday wishes last week. I had a great day full of friends and good music. I'm 21, and I'm not ready to grow up and join adulthood. I wish there was a third option. Music one day, my baby, when I am a man. Others have taught me the best they can. They assume and cut off my hair. I'm off to the subway. I must not be late. I'm going to work in all building music. Now, when I retire, life is my own. I've made all my payments. Music one day, I'll be a man, and I'll have my own family. Others have taught me well, and I'm sure they're right. I'm cutting my hair, leaving the sunshine, leaving the dew, leaving the flowers, and leaving you. I'm off to the subway. I must not be late. I'm going to work in a building.